Well, it is a new day in Ashburn and all across Commanders Nation. It has been a day, a week, months that I don't think anybody saw coming. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before on this podcast with this group of gentlemen, uh, Mark excluded, of course, um, about how it wasn't as joyous maybe originally when we first heard the news come down. I got to tell you, I started getting that joyous feeling after the press conference. You know what I mean? And not because one guy got up there and sounded good. Like, Harris sounds like a guy that you definitely want to have, a pint and a pop with. You know what I mean? At the bar, he just sounds like that guy. And I don't know if Rails doesn't get you jazzed up for whatever it is that you like to do. That man was pumped. And then, of course, Magic speaks for himself. I love the notion that Magic called right away and asked, "Is winning the plan?" Because all I do is win, and Magic's right. Everything he touches tends to work. He's the antithesis of Dan Snyder and the things that he touches. Mark, as the guest for today, we'll ask you first. Is it now kind of setting in to you on what may be possible?
Yeah, I think the whole press conference just brought the whole atmosphere around Washington football now is completely different to even a few days ago. And there's just so much more hope and optimism. I think it wasn't just kind of run-of-the-mill press conference where it didn't feel like it was genuine. Like, I think Josh Harris's kind of experience as being an owner of other franchises probably helped him out in that regard. He probably has a good idea of how to appeal to a fan base and how to come across as quite genuine when doing so. And I thought he did a really good job of that. But as you mentioned, the other two guys that spoke, they killed it. Really, they really brought kind of a passion. You could see that they feel like this is a real opportunity, and it is, because we all know the size of this fan base, what it can be, and what the franchise can mean to the league, and obviously to the city. So yeah, I thought it was a breath of fresh air, and the energy around everyone right now is complete 180 from what it's been the last 10-20 years. It's incredible, and it's great to see.
George, it was interesting at the press conference. They did not shy away from using the word Redskins, as I think the last group thought that they had to. Interesting, because they were the Redskins, and this group grew up watching the Redskins. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that is who they were. I noticed that they're using legends a lot more to refer to those original Redskins so that they don't have to use the word as much. People are going to get all worked up, George, about him using the term Redskins in this hopes that we're going to get back there because these guys grew up Redskins fans. That's not what I took away from the press conference. We're not going to do a ton on name change today, but what your thoughts on how they kind of mixed the new as far as Commanders go and really kind of put to rest any change anytime soon, but while also being willing to admit we were the Redskins and had a proud history of that. I'm curious your thoughts on how the job they did kind of intertwining the two.
Yeah, I think Josh nailed it, to be honest with you. What I took away from the press conference was Josh Harris was very earnest and honest, right? You could tell he grew up as a fan. He cared. He had emotion behind it. To be honest with you, I thought of the speakers, I thought he was probably the least refined. I thought Mitchell Rales is really refined. He could give off, he's great with his imagery and great with pulling the crowd, to him. Magic Johnson was fantastic, and he's just electric, but Josh Harris was earnest. He wanted to get across the fact that he was a Redskin fan growing up, that, Mitchell Rales and I think Mark Ein, one of them referenced, like, they used to drop me off at Capitol Heights. They used to ride the bus to RFK Stadium. It was, that's our baby. It means a lot to us. And I think it was a smart move. I think you have to acknowledge the history of the team. If you kind of put that on the shelf and be like, hey, the Redskins did not happen, or kind of dodge that name, I think it kind of would create inauthenticity with our fan base. They wouldn't be happy with that. So I like the fact they brought it up. we don't have to go crazy with the name change. I don't think they're going to go back to Redskins. I think it's too polarizing of a name nationally. I think it's just too hard to get across. But I'm glad they acknowledge it. And in regard to Washington Legends, I think that's a great thing as well. They had that last year, Doug. I saw people, during the alumni game. I went to the homecoming game last year. I believe it was the Vikings game, and they're all wearing the Washington Legends polos and hoodies and things like that. I saw Stephen Davis and Gary Clark and Ricky Ervins. It was fantastic seeing those guys in person, and I like the fact that they're invited. I'm sure we all know we're all deep, Commander Redskins football team fans. Over the year, Dan Snyder never invited. That was an epic flaw of his, was he wouldn't invite the alumni back to the stadium. And like Charles Mann alluded to it, Gerald Green was angry about it, and I like the fact that they're welcomed with open arms. So, I think he had a home run. I thought it was a great press conference. I think we're all buying in, and I'm looking forward to the new future. I'm happy with it.
Adam, assuming that he doesn't come in and make wholesale changes, which I think most people feel is his style or MO from the other, sports teams that he's bought. But in your mind, right off the top, what is one thing that he could do immediately to help with the football team, whether it's business or football side, either way?
Well, with the business side, I think he kind of laid it out, but I like the comment as he said, it's our house. If we invite someone to our house and our TV's broken, we fix it. That was his little subtle dig to Snyder. Nobody brought his name up, which I thought was great. But what I took away from that,
I was surprised, Adam. I thought maybe they would have mentioned him at least to start, but I wish we'd have taken the over-under bets on that. But you're right, no mention at all of the previous owner.
Reports are they're talking about, SMU putting about $100 million into the FedEx right now for upgrades. And, right now, I think the football stuff, that's going to be on the players and the coaches. So what can they do? I think it's the fan experience. And I think they outlined it. I think, buying beers for fans at 2 rallies was a good start. They're doing rails. They're doing something new to the field because we can see all the hash marks are gone from the field. So, it's going to be subtle changes, but I do think these are the kind of things that are going to be appeasing to fans. And, it's crazy to say, but I think they're going to have a sellout week 1 just based on, the hype and everything that's going in with the new ownership. So I think, just continue, work for the fans right now, because the fans have really just been taken for the last 24 years, for all their money, for merchandise, for all this, and really have got little in return. So I think, this is an opportunity for him to do, a lot more, giveaways that, with respect to people that went to games, not crap and not them running out of stuff. Cups that aren't, have the wrong Washington on it, like these little things. And, that's going to, beg the question, how far leeway will, Jason Wright and, the sales staff and other ones get? Because, granted, they were operating under Snyder and his direction. But, I think they're going to be just like Ron Rivera is going to be watched. All these guys are going to be watched to see how much they can do, because generating a better fan experience, that's the best thing that they can do immediately. And then, we'll get into the next couple of years for the new stadium in DC, things like that. But right away, they got to get fans back, because there's still a huge contingency out there. Take it from me. I put articles out there and the same response is, when do we change it back to Redskins? They have to do something else to bring the fans out, because fans don't want to hear that name's not coming back. So whatever they can do for the stadium experience, that's what I'm expecting them to see right away.
Do they need to say that publicly? Do they need to say, the Redskins is in the past and we're not doing that again? Do they need to say, it's not that we won't take a look at the name at a later date, like we've got other things we need to do right at the moment, but should they be at least saying, we will not be going back to the Redskins, period? I mean,
as a fan who's writing about them, I wish they would, but in the business world, I see why they wouldn't, because you're going to be alienated in a big contingency. And the point is to get new fans, but also to bring back the new. So I think they just stay away from the whole comment of not going back. It'll just be, if they look into changing it, in the future, they will. But I don't think there'll ever be a stance where we're never going to go back to Redskins. I think that's just not going to good business for them.
George, you like that, or is it necessary?
I think Adam nailed it, right? As a content creators, we're going to be hearing about the name changes for years and years and, months and months until a thing actually definitive response happens. But Adam's right. I think it's as a business standpoint, it's very wise to play middle ground right now and to not really err one way or the other. I think, honestly, it's very smart to actually look at everything, have a full year evaluation, whether it's the GM, the coaches, your analytics, your scouting, look at all of that and take your time to do so. But there's no rush to make any declarations right now, because as Adam alluded to, you don't want to cause any problems right now, because there's a glorious honeymoon. You want the honeymoon to last as long as you can, because the more chinks in the armor, the more negative press you're going to get. You don't want that right now in the first year. So I think it's just good to be like, we're going to evaluate all options. We're going to kind of weigh everything out and just kind of play it slow. And I think it's a smart thing. And they're business savvy. These guys are billionaires, multi-billionaires. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to take their time. They're good.
Mark, if I would assume that he's already hired, that Harris has already hired somebody to at least be an advisor to come in and put a fresh set of eyes on the business side, particularly on the football side, since that's really what we're gearing up to now. If you were that advisor and Harris says, okay, you've looked around the football side of things, where do we stand? What does it look like? What do we need to be seeing coming up through training camp? What is your suggestions? What is your report to Harris on the state of the football side of things?
Yeah, so I think from their perspective, they're gonna take it slow. I don't think there's any rush. Like, there's not really any immediate change that they can make to the football side of things, bar like obviously freeing up funds to give like a Cam Curl contract extension, or that kind of thing. Other than that they can't. There's no way they're going to fire GMs and coaches and everything right now. Like, because Ron Rivera is the GM, like if you fire any of his staff, you're undermining him straight away, and you're saying we're not trusting you going into the year. So you kind of have to leave everything in place, and you have to take the year to evaluate everyone, see who you think is worth keeping, and what is working and what's not working, and who's not worth keeping. And if you decide that at the end of the year we're going to clean house entirely, then so be it. If you decide that, hey, maybe there's a few guys on this staff that are worth keeping around, and that might not necessarily be the coaching staff. It could be maybe you're like, well, we really like Eric Bieniemy, or we really like Jack Del Rio, or whoever. We'll keep them. Or maybe it's we like Martin Mayhew, but we don't like Ron Rivera being above him. We want to give him the full GM title. Or maybe they like some of the scouting staff, and they keep some of those guys. But maybe it's just a complete clean house. But you have to I think you have to take a kind of clean slate approach. I don't think they can have any preconceived notions going into it. I don't think that's a fair thing to do. And obviously, us as fans or as media guys following the team, I think we all kind of have our ideas of what each guy does already. And there's no real way of knowing unless you're in the building exactly how that's playing out. So I think you have to give every guy a fair chance and really have a full, clear evaluation throughout the season of everyone, not just the players, not just the staff, the front office people, the GMs, the scouts, the head of player personnel, and all the different titles that they have there. Figure out who's worth keeping around. Figure out what structure you think works. Do you like the coach-centric structure where it's like the Ron Rivera GM and coach, or the Bill Belichick GM coach model, or do you want to go to a more traditional, we want a GM to sort the roster and we want a coach to coach the players? Or maybe they want something in between, or some completely new method. They have to decide what that structure they like is. And that takes, to get a full idea of exactly what you want for that, I think that's going to take the full season to fully evaluate what is going well and what's not going so well.
Adam, if that same question was asked about Ron Rivera and his time here, has he done a better job as the GM of the team or the head coach of the team?
I'm going to lean maybe a little more to the GM part, just because I like the moves. I like the draft picks. I like, the mentality. But as far as on the field, he's had a major delegation issue. I think that hopefully changes this year. with him giving power to Eric Bieniemy just to run that offense. Del Rio's running his side, and from what I hear, they brought in people, clock management people, situational people that they didn't have last year. So I think he's trending in the right direction. But as a coach, record aside, they're always around hover around that 500 mark. I think he's missed the bar as a head coach, but I think this will be an opportunity this year to really show if he's grown at all. But, my inclination is that I think we're going to see, Eric Bieniemy really rise as, a future head candidate to watch, because I think, it's not about Ron Rivera getting fired. If I'm not mistaken, it's the last year of his contract. So I don't think that there will be, any big, hub about it. I just think, no matter what they do, I think, his time is probably coming to an end. I think, his main purpose was really trying to clean up the image, restore, everything about them that they weren't. But after that, I he's a good story. Other than that, but he's just missed the bar as the head coach. And, in Carolina, aside from Cam Newton and some of the defensive guys he had there, that, he wasn't a GM part of that. I don't think he's really had a great track record. So I think that really, they're going to see what they have. And I think Eric Bieniemy, come the end of this year, will be the hottest head coaching candidate. And I think he ends up being the head coach for this team. So.
If Bieniemy ends up becoming the hottest head coach candidate, means they had a good year, which means it would be hard to move off Rivera after having had a good year, right? I mean, to me, and we'll get your thoughts on it after this, George, that's the interesting conundrum of what we're looking at here with this season. If the offense plays really well and you assume the defense will hold their end of the bargain, then this ought to be a very good football team, which means Eby probably is gone, but yet you would assume you'd keep Ron then. I wonder if Ron succeeds well enough during this season, if the big changes come more in the way of the general manager overseer. Like Ron, I generally think Ron has done a better job in the front office than he has done on the sideline, but I'm trying to find, I find it hard for them to move on in very many capacities if they have a good season this year. George, where are you on this, cat chasing the tail type scenario we find ourselves in?
It's a great question.
Has a good year.
Yeah, it's a very complex question too. Well, let me start off with this. Josh Harris has no connection to Ron Rivera. We'll start off with that, right? He inherited Ron Rivera. It's a trial period. Ron Rivera can earn his stripes, and he can basically earn respect and show that integrity to Josh Harris, and we can see where that goes. But there is no connection, right? The second part of your question is the success. If the team has success, let's say the team is successful and Ron Rivera does well. I truly believe that Josh Harris is more business and analytical motivated. I think he'll actually make the best business decision and best long-term decision. I think it's unrealistic for Ron Rivera to get a contract extension. I don't see that happening as the head coach. It's been documented, Doc Rivers in Philadelphia, Jerry Colangelo is a GM and the 76ers as well. He wants the best coaches and he wants the best GMs. He wants the best of the best to basically lead his team and be hands off. So my two paths is that basically Ron Rivera, if he is successful and he does have a good impression with Josh Harris, I think he'll probably stay within the organization in some aspect, but no longer as a head coach. I don't see him being a head coach because I think Eric Bieniemy will be the hottest candidate, and I think Josh Harris will see that, see the projection, and see hey, it's an offense-driven league, it's analytics. I'm going to basically follow that, and hopefully, if we have a good year, Sam Howell playing pretty well as well. So keeping EB and Sam Howell together would be the long-term, combination there. So I think that's kind of the more realistic path. I don't think Ron Rivera will get a contract extension. If anything, go in the front office. And I think Josh Harris is smart enough and clean cut enough. There's no emotions attached with Ron Rivera. He'll do what's best for the team, in my opinion.
Mark, are we at the point where we're overhyping Bieniemy's contribution to what will happen this year? I mean, these are not the only two that are suggesting that Bieniemy may be the best, most hyped name at the end of the year. Are we overly excited because of where we're coming from?
I think there's probably a little bit of getting carried away a little bit. I don't want to dampen the excitement, and I can certainly see the kind of scenario and the viewpoint that they're coming from. I think a lot of it would depend on Sam Howell, and like if he shows that he can be the quarterback of the future this year, then I don't think even if they go 10 or 11 wins and they go into the playoffs and they do really well, I don't see how they could risk losing Bieniemy if Howell looks like the guy under Bieniemy's offense. And in which case you'd see a situation kind of like I think the Bucs did it a few years ago when they fired a defensive-minded head coach to promote the offensive coordinator to keep him with a young quarterback. And I think that would be the kind of situation where you'd have to be a bit ruthless and say, yeah, Ron Rivera, you did produce a good winning football team, but for the future of this franchise, we don't want Sam Howell having to learn another new offense. We want him partnered with Eric Bieniemy long term. But that is a fairly big assumption at this point. And I like Sam Howell, and I think he's got a lot of potential, and I can see a path for this offense to produce that kind of end result. But there is still the question mark of can he do it? And until we see him do it consistently, you never really know. And so in that scenario, yes, I can see where these guys are coming from. I'd still say the more likely scenario is Sam Howell probably isn't the guy. And then you're looking at, well, Eric Bieniemy could still be a really good coach, and he could still prove that, I'm getting receivers open. I didn't have the quarterback to run this offense properly, or I'm producing a decent offense and the quarterback was holding me back. And then maybe he is still a hot coaching candidate, but there's always a new, young and up and coming hot prospect to be a potential head coach. And there's always some kind of star head coach that's in retirement that could come out of retirement for them. And Josh Harris, I'm sure, has his own list of guys in mind that I have this list of GMs and I have this list of coaches, and these GMs will have the coaches that they want, and the coaches will have the GMs that they want in mind, and he'll be working through pairings and stuff like that. So I'm sure he's got his own guys lined up as well. So I think if it does play out that, Sam Howell plays well and he looks like he can be the guy for the future, then I think then it becomes kind of almost a no-brainer that you give Eric Bieniemy the job and you keep that pairing going forward. But that I think there is a significant if there, that I think we're all kind of getting maybe a little bit too far ahead of ourselves and assuming that is definitely what's going to happen.
It's funny that you brought the having to learn a new offense, because Mark, you were the first one to tell me on one of these podcasts that one of the nice things about having an offensive-minded head coach is you're not losing said offensive-minded head coach, thereby having to, whether it's a new offense or at least somebody that coaches that new offense, having a defensive head coach means you're replacing the offensive coordinator a lot, assuming you're doing some winning. So I could see how that happens here. Training camp to me will be interesting. I think we could see a lot of what he has in mind as far as Harris at training camp. My brother asks me all the time, since the sale here, do you think he has an advisor that's already been around? Do you think he has somebody that can come in and at least just take a look at things? Like I said, like we've all said, I don't expect major changes in year one, but I would have to assume he's got somebody that he trusts personally to come in and look at everything. Even if said person says, you know what, they really got a good thing going on here, I wouldn't change a whole lot. If you see that person at camp, I think that would be really interesting and fascinating to see who it is. And then you might know of a direction that they're going to go. The other thing that he could do fairly quickly, Adam, is start bolstering what is a really small analytics department. I'm assuming that Harris will lead the charge in some ways on this front. He certainly did in the NBA early. Where are you on the mixture of analytics to tape watching as far as its current place in the NFL?
I think you just have to be careful. You just have to have, a decent balance. And I agree that I think you're going to see that analytics division really expand with them. I would also like to see their scouting department scan a little bit, because I think I read the other day that they're like in the bottom 5 for, I guess, the amount of national scouts that they have. So, that they're heavily invested into the SEC, which is great. But, we're seeing, more and more players come out of the Division II level, and more the unknown colleges. So the more scouts you have, the better. So I think it's that fine balance that, you expand your scouting department. But yeah, the analytics role, I think it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And if you're not on board with that, you're going to be left behind. So I definitely think that that's something that they're going to heavily invest in.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool. So I was going to read a quote to you guys that I read in The Athletic the other day from David Aldridge. So this was told to David Aldridge, a businessman that knows Josh Harris. He says he'll have 15 models by Tuesday that are like the perfect way to build a team, leveraging the hard cap and where you put your money and how you build an organization. A businessman told David Aldridge in April, do you build the offensive line first? Do you build the defensive line first? Do you build the quarterback? He'll have a plan quickly. He'll do the research and do the work. He'll put the data science in place, put the health and wellness people in place. He's no joke. His people are wicked smart. I'm actually going to tweet that out later on today. I read it last night. That's some fantastic news hearing about just how much data and how much research he looks into his team. So I just love hearing that, and how he's going to invest in the team, invest in the logistics of how things will be successful. So I'm pretty happy with that.
And when we talk about the difference in ownership, I think that will be one of the really big things that we see is money actually being spent on the team, which was not under Dan. And of course, the way that they use it, I think, will be important. And a lot of that is in health and recovery. So I think analytics can be done right away. And then the health and recovery staff and system can be helped and bettered right away. And to your point, I think it was you, Adam, earlier. It looks like they've already started putting work into the field, which would be fantastic, because the field could be good. I'm not sure why they hadn't put more resources into that before, but it's not. Well, you're not living in an area where you can't get grass to grow. I guess is what I'm saying. All right, let's take a look at the first 4 games here, because I think as I went back and looked at the schedule, the first 4 games are interesting and they're going to be extremely important. Let's start out with week 1. George, I know you brought some stats and info about the opposition. This one should be winnable. Sounds like no Kyler Murray game 1. They've got to start out winning this one.
I agree. I think the Cardinals going to walk into a buzzsaw, but what I'll do is I'll go over the record, the offensive rankings, the points per game, and so on and so forth. So the Cardinals are 4-13 last year. They had the 22nd ranked offense in terms of yards. They had 20 points per game, which was 21st overall. They had 17 passing touchdowns, and they had the 18th best passing offense. What's going to be in Washington's favor is the Cardinals' defense is really bad, to be honest with you. They averaged 29 points per game against, which was 28th in the league, 24th in yards. They gave up 21 rushing touchdowns, which was 27th in the league. And basically their passing defense was 28th in the league. So 27th in run defense, 28th in pass defense, 31st in points per game. So their defense is actually in a real rough shape, and that's without the firepower of Kyler Murray. Last thing I'll say before I throw it to the crowd is that their key additions were also kind of weak as well. Like I tried to find a couple key additions that I thought were very powerful, and the Cardinals added Paris Johnson in the draft, obviously, so nice legit tackle, and they added B.J. Ojulari as well. But in regard to key free agents, they didn't add anybody at all. In fact, DeAndre Hopkins left, so they basically are not the most powerful team out there, and I think it's a good team for Washington to play week 1.
Mark, the Cardinals could be one of these teams that is the rare one and done at quarterback, because if they're terrible this year, the head coach could be out to pair it up with a new GM and although the GM's only been there 2 years, but they're not very good. They've got to have this win, don't they?
Yeah, if I think it would be a real bad start if they don't come away with a win here, and it's almost being served up to them as like, hey, you guys have got this fresh start under new ownership. You've got fresh hope. And here's one of the worst teams in the league. Go beat them. Go pile on the hope and get everyone excited. So if they come out of that and without a win, that's borderline a fireable offense for Ron Rivera, because you have to come away with that win, especially with the few games they have after that looking kind of tough. So you have to come away with a win there, 100%.
Particularly if Colt McCoy is comes out as your starting quarterback, and I think if it's not Colt, it's like an undrafted free agent rookie that plays in his stead. So I think we can all agree that the week 1 game is a winner at home. Let's move on to game 2, and I got to tell you, these next 3 games are interesting.
Yeah.
They're not winners by any means.
They are. So I think the Cardinals, I think the Washington's going to get in a buzz. So I don't want to be like, I try to be pretty pragmatic and objective. I think Washington's going to win by double digits against the Cardinals, to be honest with you. But going into Denver, so going to Denver week 2, Denver was 5-12 last year. Their offense was 21st in regard to yards, but 32nd in points per game, so 16.9. So their offense is actually really bad, but their defense is pretty solid. In terms of passing, they were 23rd in terms of passing touchdowns, 28th in rushing touchdowns, but their defense was 7th overall in terms of yards and 14th in points per game. Going down over here, their passing defense is what makes them pretty damn elite. They had the 5th overall passing defense. They only allowed 20 touchdowns all year long. We all know about Patrick Surtain. He's a really great athlete out there. And what Denver did all offseason was add to their offensive line. They added Ben Powers from the Ravens. They added Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers. They added Frank Clark on the defensive side from the Chiefs. Samaje Perine, a very familiar face from the DC. People hate on him, but he actually was a pretty good pass catching back from the Bengals last year. And then they added Marquez Callaway from the Saints. So that's going to be our week 2 matchup. What do you guys think?
And of course, they also added Sean Payton.
Oh, yeah.
Who would you'd assume would make, if you're a Sean Payton fan, Adam, does this game scare you or feels like an easy win with the Denver Broncos team that's got a new coaching staff?
I don't see it as an easy win, but I think they're catching him at the right time. I think Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, they're going to take a little bit to get going. I have the utmost confidence in Payton, not so much with Russell. We saw what happened when Washington played him. They showed he's had this amazing physical transformation in the offseason. He looks, in shape, ready to go. But again, he's getting older, another system. And Payton's system, from everything that I've heard, it's not an easy system to learn. And I think there's been some questions with that with Russell Wilson during his career. Is he, like to freelance a lot, kind of go off script. And, as much as I know that's okay with Payton in certain situations, he has his system. So I think Washington catches him at the right time. It'll be a decent matchup. Again, Denver has, a decent defensive backfield. So I think that won't be a cakewalk. But no, I think Washington wins that at least, by 7 points.
Mark, it's interesting, as I heard George reading off their offseason acquisitions, it basically was like the offensive line checklist that I heard everybody in Washington say they hoped came here, of which they took none. Story for a different day, I suppose. But, yeah, they got an intriguing roster in Denver. I was looking at it before we got started. To George's point, they've got the kid. What's the quarterback that you referenced, George?
Surtain.
Surtain. Yeah, and they've got Simmons in the backfield, but they've also got a set of receivers that I think are really good. They remind me a little bit of the young core of Washington. Jerry Jeudy, particularly, could be looking at a breakout year. He kind of gets forgotten out there, but I mean, he was one of the more nasty Alabama receivers that's come out in a little while. They could be a sleeping giant too. How do you kind of see this game shaping out, Mark?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. They're a little bit of a sleeping giant. Like, go back to this time last year, and they were one of the Super Bowl favorites because their roster was pretty much ready to win now. And then they added Russell Wilson, and everyone assumed, well, Russell Wilson's a good quarterback, and the rest of the roster is ready to win, so they'll go and win. And then we saw what happened with Russell, but with Sean Payton as a coach that I personally rate very highly, certainly from a schematic standpoint, you don't last in the league as long as he has with producing as many top offenses as he has without being a very, very good offensive mind. So I think if anyone's going to revive Russell Wilson's career, it will be Sean Payton. And, it may take a few weeks and maybe playing them early in the year is a good point that potentially they catch them at the right time. but I don't think the Broncos are any kind of pushover. That defense is serious. They're threats on the outside, as you said. The weapons, the receivers, really good, and they will run Washington close, especially Washington's on the road, going to Denver. That's never easy, and it's an overall good team. It's rather like Washington. It's reliant on the quarterback play, and I guess if you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective, you're betting on, one of the best offensive minds in recent NFL history, Sean Payton, with one of the best quarterbacks in recent NFL history, Russell Wilson, versus Eric Bieniemy, a guy that comes from Andy Reid, but has this question of how good is he without Andy Reid, and Sam Howell, who has played one game, looked decent, and he was a 5th-round pick. So when you look at it from that kind of outside perspective, maybe the edge goes to Denver, but maybe Russell Wilson has just completely lost it, and at which point, Washington feasts on some interceptions, and the defense holds up for him.
George, this is going to be one of those seasons where we're going to go into a lot of these games where Washington fans are going to say, oh, we definitely should be able to beat these guys. And I imagine the other fan base is saying the same thing, right? Washington's coming to town. We got to be able to beat these guys, right? I think Mark made a great point. Going out to Denver, never easy. Reality is, George, they've got to win this game.
100%.
Or I think they're in trouble of hitting that 2-2 mark through the first 4 games, which I think they really need to get to. As we're looking at whether they win or lose, are we thinking more about they've got to win this game so we can get to 2-2, considering how tough the next 2 are? Or do you really feel like they've got the upper hand in this one out in Denver?
I think you're right, though. Your initial comment, Doug, was spot on, right? Like Denver, the New York Giants, the Seattle Seahawks, like those types of games that we have on our schedule this year, those are the ones we have to win. If we want to be a playoff team, those are the deciders. Like, we're playing the Bills, but the Bills are a NFC, AFC contender, a championship caliber team. So again, we're not expected to win those, but if we're trying to be that upper half of the league team, we should beat the Denver Broncos. I think Adam nailed it. I think that's on my notes said the exact same thing. I think it's going to be a ugly game. I don't think it's going to be very pretty. It's 2 good defenses going against each other, 2 pretty mediocre quarterbacks going against each other. And we'll see how Sam Howell does, but I don't think Russell Wilson is really elite anymore. And I think it's going to be like a 17-13 ugly, 1:00 game we see on Sunday afternoons. But I think Washington's going to pull it out. I think Washington's going to win this game. I think Washington is better overall. Denver's missing Javonte Williams, so he might be coming back from his ACL, but there's going to be a deficit there. So I think Washington will pull it out. But to your point, I think going against the Bills and the Eagles is pretty dangerous territory. And being real and being objective, I think Washington's going to be skewing towards 2-2 anyway. I think the Bills is going to be the hardest matchup of the first 4 games. Eagles, they know us pretty well, but that's a coin flip. I think the Bills game's going to be very difficult. The hardest of the first 4 for me, in my opinion.
Well, and that Eagles game is the home game for them, right? It's an away game for us.
Yeah, away game for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so generally when I do these preseason, predictions or whatever, I just go half and half for everybody.
Exactly right.
Through the division. So if you use that logic for this one and just give the Eagles the victory, just if that's the way we're doing things, then that to me is why game 2 is so important. Because it gives you that, assuming you get week 1, it gets you that 2-2 cushion, and everything else, the 2 games are just all freebies on top. Adam, where do you see the game? What do they have to do to win that Bills game?
Turnovers, being ranked back-to-back 29th and 28th the last 2 years. I think, that's what you brought in Forbes for, and, even Martin, Forbes brings in, 14 career interceptions. Martin brings in, I think it was 5. So, it's a clear, blueprint there. They're going to have to, play well on every phase of the game, but they have to have multiple turnovers to beat, a quarterback of that caliber. So I think that, besides everything going right, turnovers into points. I think that that's going to have to be the defining measuring stick, not just against Buffalo, against the better teams that, that they're supposed to be. Because I think Buffalo is not just the better team in the first 4 games. It's probably one of the best teams in the first half of their season. So I think if somehow they can win that game and go into Philadelphia, let's say, with a 3-game winning streak, man, that changes a lot. I think, that not only helps your team, but a young quarterback like Sam Howell, I think if you watched him progress, during his time with the Tar Heels, when that season when they were winning some games, you just saw him really feed off of that. So I think that could just really be the difference of, although it's early in the season, that could be a difference of them really competing for a title. Because right now, I think a safe bet for me, I think, with what their upgrades, 9 wins seems about right. But if things really go right, 10, 11 wins aren't out of the question. But again, Buffalo, one of those games where they got to click on all cylinders.
Yeah, it's up in Buffalo, Mark, which is never easy to get that win on the road. The 2 teams are kind of like the Spider-Man meme, right? Like they want to be built the same, which makes sense because they all were in Carolina together. How different are the rosters if you take quarterback out of it, Mark?
I still think Buffalo probably has a little bit more depth overall, and probably more than just edges it. I think they're still comfortably a better team overall, and that's not to put down what Washington is building. And I do like a lot of what Washington has, but the Bills have been contending for a while now, and they have shown that they can consistently, manage different players leaving and replacing them and finding new roles for different players. And they consistently put out a good football team every year since that Carolina unit went up there. So yeah. It's for me, it's hard to see Washington being able to beat them. Perhaps as we've kind of mentioned, if they can go in there 2-0, and kind of play on a winning streak, then create a few turnovers, then maybe.
As I said on the road, but Buffalo is actually at home, right?
Yeah, it's at home.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe if you're building on that fan momentum in your 2-0 and the place is loud and you get a couple of early turnovers and the offense has some early success, then maybe you can steal that one. But I certainly, for me personally, I have this one down as a loss for them.
I do too. 2-2 sounds about right. Considering what I said about the Eagles, we can discuss them. We're going to do one of these Mondays. We're going to start breaking down the NFC East. So it's not necessarily the appropriate time to do it today, other than the fact that it's a team that's on the roster. So I guess I'll ask this without having to dive into their roster. I'm curious from each one of you. Adam, I'll start with you. Do you think that Philly takes a step back this year? Do we see a regression from where they were last year? We often hear about the loser of the Super Bowl kind of having one of these lulls the next year. Do you see that, or are they built to just keep on rocking and rolling?
I think that only happens if they have like injuries at some key positions. I think, they've really built a lot of depth on that team, especially on defense. But, you start talking about the offensive line, a couple, injuries here and there to tackles. That's definitely a recipe for, regression. But I don't think they regress. I think that they're going to compete. Will they win as many games? No. I think that they'll win less games, but I think they'll be in it to the end for the division title. I don't see them going back to the NFC Championship. So I guess, you could say, I guess that is a form of regression. But as far as record-wise, how far will they go? No, I think that they'll go well into the playoffs. I think that they're really built the right way. But I think that, everyone is like writing off the Cowboys and even the Giants at this point. I think those teams will definitely be better, as will Washington. So I think it's for this, again, this division is going to be one of the toughest divisions in football. And who knows, we could see three again in the playoffs next year.
Mark, you agree? You think this has now quietly become one of the better divisions in football?
Yeah, I think so. I think I could see Philly regressing slightly in that they did lose a lot of their defensive pieces from last year. But Harry Roseman's kind of proven at this point that he's very, very good at retooling an entire roster in one off season. And being able to go from winning the Super Bowl to trading Carson Wentz's horrific contract to going back to the Super Bowl in such a short space of time is really incredible. So I wouldn't bet against him having, they lost a fair few pieces, especially on defense, but I would not bet against him having, replaced those guys or having guys lower on the depth chart that will now step up and take over some roles of some of the guys they've lost. So I think they will be a very good team. And I think it'll be very hard for Washington to beat them. Not saying they can't. Obviously, we saw them beat them last year. But I think that at that point, you're coming off of that Bills game, and it would be kind of tough to bounce back from that against Philly. Maybe the kind of divisional aspect of it, you bounce back and you get up for that one a little bit more. But I think 2-2 is probably where I'm at with those first four games. If anything, I slightly edge towards 1-3 just because they're going to Denver, and I rate Peyton that highly that I think if he's going to get Russell Wilson back on track, he's going to scheme things for him, and we'll see how Washington handles that. But so I'm kind of leaning towards 2-2, 1-3. I think if you go 2-2, I think you'd be happy. If you steal a third, you're over the moon.
That's where I'm at. I think 2-2, you'd be pretty happy. 1-3 is a tough look when you look at the regular schedule, and 3-1, of course, you're over the moon. History, Mark, shows that the team will start 1-3. That's just what they technically do. I ask this all the time. I know you look at the tape. Can you put your finger on what it is or why it is that all these teams under Rivera, all the way back to Carolina, start off slow? Now, they always end up on heaters, but they never get out of the gate fast. Is there something you've seen in looking at the tape and watching the games that is an aha moment as to why this always happens?
There's not anything specific. I would have thought, given, Rivera's going to know far more tape than I do. If there was something that obvious to me, it was something that he would have corrected by now at this point in his career. So there's nothing that I can really put a finger on saying, yeah, this is why they're starting slow. And I think it's probably relatively unique to each season. And obviously, over Rivera's career, it's been a thing. But like last year, they had that issue of, the defense started off really poorly, and that was a lot down to William Jackson being back there and not being on the same page as everyone else. And that created a lot of coverage issues, and that gave up a lot of points that they shouldn't really have been giving up. So you hope that, this year that changes and they have a lot more people back going into another year with pretty much mostly the same defense. If they wanted to, they could basically run the same defense as last year, bar like obviously the linebacker spot where they don't have Cole Holcomb anymore. But towards the end of the year, they were just running Jamin Davis because Holcomb was injured anyway. So they can pretty much run back that look, and you'd hope they'd be able to have some success doing that. You obviously hope you mix in Forbes and Martin and see some upgrades as well. So hopefully the defense is able to start off better than they have, and then obviously we'll have to wait and see. It always kind of comes down to how well does Sam Howell do, and that feels like a cop out, but it does so much relies on that quarterback spot. So that is kind of what it comes down to with the offense is how I think the scheme, from everything I've studied from the Chiefs, the scheme will be set up really well. It will be very well thought out. It will be really well scouting opponents and understanding not just what kind of coverages they play, but what the coverage rules are and how to exploit that. So I think their players will be put in the right position to succeed. It's just a case of can they execute, and obviously that we'll just have to wait and see on.
One last one for you, Mark. Carl's going to be coming up for an extension soon. I imagine the reason they hadn't got it done yet is because they were waiting on the ownership change. We've looked at the numbers. I think if he becomes the 10th highest paid safety in the league, that puts him right around where Marcus Williams was with the Ravens last year at about 16. I think it's 16 million. It's like 5 years, 72 million with 34 guaranteed. Is that where you're at with Curl?
I would do what it takes to sign Cam Curl. I rate him very highly. I think the defense relies a lot on what he offers. And he is very much the modern style of defensive back where he can play a lot of different roles. He can, if you need him to, you can play him single high. Obviously, you'd rather not necessarily do that, but he can play too deep. He can play the quarter stuff. He can play the deep half. He can play roll down into the box. He can play dime linebacker. He can play over the slot. He fills so many different roles. And in the modern era of NFL defenses, you're looking for those versatile DBs that you can line up in certain spots. You can disguise your coverages and you can rotate after the snap. And you can, with Carl being a safety, but with some decent corner skills as a history as at corner in college, being able to mix and match guys around and not having to swap out personnel depending on the offensive personnel, it gives you so much flexibility. And we saw that when Curl wasn't with the team last year, when he was injured, the defense was significantly worse. So he brings a hell of a lot to this team. I'm not a huge numbers contracts guy, so I can't say go pay him $20 million a year or whatever. I'm not that good with that stuff, but I would say I'd be willing to go. I'd be willing to stretch quite a way to make sure Cam Curl's locked down for a long time.
And is he coordinator specific? I mean, do you lock him up right now? What if Del Rio and Ron aren't here next year? A whole new group comes in. Now you've got, let's say the 10th, 9th, 8th highest paid safety in the league. Does he provide for all defensive coordinators what he does for this group, or is he more valuable to this group than to others?
I mean, to an extent, he's more valuable to this group than others, but I think any defensive coordinator that you hire that doesn't understand his versatility is doing a bad job and not necessarily someone you don't want to hire. Right. So like the versatility and the amount of roles he can play from snap to snap, not just, from series to series or game to game, from snap to snap, he can move all over the field. That brings so much to a defense. And if your new defensive coordinator isn't making use of that, then get rid of them and find someone that will, because that's a huge asset.
Okay, let's wrap like this. Adam, I'm curious, training camp is here. What is the one thing that you are most looking for at camp?
My biggest concern, which is the offensive line. I know Howell comes in, a big concern for many, and I get that, but I think the cohesion and the chemistry along the offensive line is going to be so key because, the way Gates is, working with Howell, Cosmi, spending full time at guard, Wiley, our new right tackle, Leno stable, Charles competing with Paul right now. Charles has the upper hand. These are a lot of question marks in my opinion for the offensive line. So I'm looking. You can only see so much in camp with the lack of full contact, but that scrimmage against Baltimore, that's going to be huge because I think that's when you're going to really see how that offensive line is going. Granted, they'll still have a month plus after that, but I think the offensive line's cohesion, that's my number one concern. What I'll be looking at.
What about you, George?
Kind of building off of Adam, I think efficiency is what I'm looking for. I want to see great communication with Eric Bieniemy. This is on offense. I want Eric Bieniemy to be a great communicator with Sam Howell. I want to see him getting out of the huddle pretty quickly. I want to see him throwing off his third step, 1, 2, 3, boom, and throwing the ball quickly. Because I do agree the offensive line is going to be a mediocre, average offensive line this year. So there might be a lot of pressure. And the way to combat that is to get rid of the ball quickly. Right. So is Sam Howell sharp? Because Sam Howell, does he know where to throw with anticipation? Does he know where to throw off his back foot? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for accuracy and efficiency. And I hope that's what I'm seeing. So because I think our players on offense can thrive with yards after catch. I think Dotson, McLaurin, Samuel, they can thrive with that. So get rid of the ball quickly. Don't make our offensive line have a lot of pressure, and just be quick, just be efficient. And I'm looking forward to that.
And piggyback just a little bit off of yours, Adam. Also, a brand new O-line coach too, right? So not only will it be somewhat of a new system, but I think it's a new guy teaching them to, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Mark, as the guest, we'll give you the last thoughts here. What is it that you are looking for in camp this year?
Well, first off, I'm looking for any fans that are going to tweet me videos of stuff that's happening, because being in the UK, or when I go back to Sweden, I'm not going to be able to see any of that. So tweet me clips. I will enjoy that. Not just, a guy stretching on the sideline. Show me some actual plays.
I'll be there. I'll be there Friday, Mark. I got you. I'll tag you in the pictures.
Thank you.
I got
you. Yeah. So that's number one. But yeah, I think obviously we're all kind of focused on the offense and how Sam Howell does. I think the two guys covered it. Offensive line, you want to see some cohesion, and you want to see Bieniemy kind of. The way I see this offense being is it's going to be, as we mentioned, the efficiency aspect. They're going to be looking to get the ball out quickly into their playmakers' hands. It's going to be lots of quick game passes. It's going to be lots of RPOs. It's going to be screen game, and you want to see Sam Howell being efficient. You want to see him. The first and foremost is you want to see him repeat the footwork that he showed against Dallas, where he significantly improved from preseason last year towards the end of last season. You want to see that be repetitive for him. You don't want to see him, against the live pass rush with, Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne and that defensive front in his face. You don't want to see him then resort back to terrible habits and bad footwork. You want to see him continue to take the correct amount of drops, take the hitch step, line up with where his reads are, and getting the ball out quickly and on time. And so that if he's able to stay efficient that way and stay streamlined and not add in extra steps or shorten his drop too often or take 5 hitch steps when he needs to be getting the ball out a lot quicker. If he's doing all of that stuff, then I think that is a very good sign for him going forward, that the work that he did all last year throughout the season when he wasn't playing has kind of set in as muscle memory. And that's a huge thing for him, because that was his biggest issue last year, was footwork. And then he showed some improvements, and you just want to see those kind of stick and not be just kind of a flash in the pan.
And I'll say, since all those were about offense, I'm curious to see Forbes continue on top of what he did last time. And I'm curious about Chase Young. I mean, if Chase Young is anywhere close to who they thought they were getting with the second overall pick, then the defense really is nasty this year, and they can hang their hat on that kind of a defense and really win ball games and dictate ball games that way. Mark, we appreciate you coming on today. Always glad to have you. And you two fellas, I'll see you next week.
Take it easy, guys.
Sounds good. Bye, guys.
Thanks.